I was not looking for giants when this started. I was looking at doorways. Specifically, I was looking at doorways in government buildings from the 18th and 19th centuries that were 12 to 15 feet high in working corridors where grandeur serves no architectural purpose. Back hallways, administrative passages, the kind of spaces where nobody is trying to impress anyone and every design decision is supposed to be functional. There is no aesthetic argument for a 12-foot door in the hallway behind a courthouse clerk's office. There is no ceremonial argument for staircases with risers so tall that a normal person must stretch uncomfortably to climb them. There is no rational explanation for the furniture I started finding in estate sales and museum storage rooms. Chairs with seat heights of 30 to 36 inches. Standard seat height is 18 inches. These chairs were not thrones. They were not ceremonial pieces commissioned to intimidate foreign dignitaries. They were ordinary dining chairs and desk chairs and sitting chairs designed for daily use by someone whose body required them. I filed these things away for months as architectural curiosities, the kind of anomaly you note and move past without pulling on the thread. Then I found the photographs, not paintings, not folklore. Not stories passed through generations of embellishment that could be attributed to exaggeration or myth. Photographs, actual photographic evidence from the mid to late 19th century showing human beings standing next to normal-sized people at scales that should not be possible. The grain matched, the lighting matched, the shadows fell correctly. These images predated the technology required to fake them convincingly. And the moment I understood what I was looking at, the doorways stopped being curiosities. They became evidence. And the question they were asking became the only question that mattered. The images cluster in specific decades, primarily between 1850 and 1900. Cartes de visite from the 1860s, cabinet cards from the 1870s, tintype images from the 1880s. Men and occasionally women standing 8, sometimes 10 feet tall, photographed in formal settings alongside family members and colleagues of normal height. Not circus performers advertised as such, not showmen with documented names and traveling routes and promotional materials. Just people. Individuals in period-appropriate formal clothing photographed the way any person of social standing was photographed in that era. The British Museum archives contain several examples. The Smithsonian references them in passing and categorizes them as medical anomalies without further investigation. French collections show similar images filed and catalogued and left. Russian imperial records reference persons of unusual stature serving in ceremonial and administrative roles. The pattern of institutional response is identical across every archive. Acknowledge, categorize, move on, never investigate, never ask the question that the images are asking. Question is not whether these people existed. They are in the photographs. The question is why there were so many of them, why they appear consistently in positions of authority and oversight rather than as curiosities or performers, why the photographs stop appearing so abruptly, not gradually the way a fashion fades or a medical condition decreases in prevalence over generations. Abruptly. After approximately 1900, this category of image essentially disappears from the photographic record. And the disappearance is perfectly synchronized with the disappearance of something else from a completely different kind of record. The maps, once you have seen the photographs, the architecture stops making the sense it made before. Courthouses across America built in the 18th and 19th centuries, with interior doors measuring 12 to 15 feet in working passages where nobody is performing for an audience. Administrative buildings throughout Europe with staircases calibrated to a stride length that makes a normal adult feel like a child climbing them. Government complexes in Russia, in India, in South America, in every region where the grand civic architecture of the pre-industrial era survives, featuring the same proportional signatures. In St. Petersburg, administrative buildings from the 1700s have 12-foot doors in back hallways. In Buenos Aires, municipal structures from the same era feature staircases requiring enormous strides to climb comfortably. In Delhi, colonial-era government buildings officially built by and for British administrators contain furniture at scales that would make a 6-foot man feel small. These are not ceremonial spaces. These are working spaces, offices, administrative centers, the everyday architecture of governance and record-keeping and oversight. Every proposed explanation for the oversized proportions runs into the same problem. Grandeur explains entrance halls and reception rooms. It does not explain back corridors and clerks' offices. Ceremonial design explains the spaces where power is performed. It does not explain the spaces where work gets done. The only explanation that accounts for oversized proportions in functional working spaces is that the people working in those spaces required them. And that explanation, the straightforward one, the one the photographs support, is the one that no institutional framework has been willing to adopt. The furniture is one category of evidence. The tools are another, and in some ways more difficult to dismiss, because tools are not decorative, and they are not ceremonial, and their scale is determined entirely by the hands that use them. I am talking about the large wrenches and implements that keep appearing in demolition sites and estate sales and barn clearouts across Europe and North America. Tools measuring 4, 5, sometimes 6 feet in length, not display pieces, not commemorative objects. Functional tools with the wear patterns that come from actual use. Grip erosion at the handle points. Surface wear on the working surfaces. The specific pattern of abrasion that accumulates on a tool that has been picked up and put down, and picked up again thousands of times by hands that knew exactly what they were doing with it. Museums categorize them as industrial equipment without explaining what industrial process would require a wrench that weighs 200 pounds and needs to be operated by someone with a grip span and hand strength far beyond any normal human. Auction houses sell them as antique curiosities without asking why they keep appearing. If these were the specialized tools of a single unusual industrial application, they would be rare. They keep appearing in estate sales across multiple countries, in demolition sites from buildings that date to the 18th and 19th centuries, in barn cleanouts on properties that have been in families since the same era. The volume of surviving examples is inconsistent with specialized one-off manufacturing. These tools were made in quantities sufficient that they are still turning up more than a century after they were last used. And the hands they were made for are the same hands that show up in the photographs. The same hands that used the 12-foot doors and climbed the oversized staircases and sat in the chairs whose seat heights assume a body calibrated to a different scale. Tartaria appears on maps from the 18th and early 19th centuries as a vast territory spanning northern Asia. Not a legend, not a contested historiographical category, an actual labeled region appearing in encyclopedias and atlases and historical reference works with the casual certainty of France or Spain. Then sometime in the mid-19th century it vanishes, not conquered in any war the historical record documents. Not renamed through any treaty or political transition that generated the usual paper trail. Not gradually faded as empires sometimes fade. Erased, the maps are redrawn, the encyclopedias are revised, the reference works omit it, and the history books that replace the older ones proceed as though it was never there. The architecture does not vanish with it. Massive stone structures across Central Asia and Russia and Mongolia survive, buildings of extraordinary scale and precision. Doorways sized for bodies larger than the ones currently using them. Halls that echo with a vastness no practical function explains. All officially attributed to various empires and local craftsmen with no documented construction records, no verified engineering lineage, no account of how the technical knowledge required to produce them was developed or transmitted. Now synchronize the timelines. Tartaria disappears from maps in the mid-19th century. The photographs of oversized individuals cluster between 1850 and 1900, and then stop. The newspaper reports of giant skeletal discoveries peak in the late 19th century, and then stop. The buildings that accommodate bodies of a scale, consistent with the photographs and the skeletal reports, remain, repurposed and administratively renamed, and officially attributed to the civilizations that moved into them after the civilization that built them was gone. The synchronization across these independent lines of evidence is not coincidental. Coincidence is a local phenomenon. It explains one anomaly at one time in one place. It does not explain the same anomalous pattern appearing across multiple independent evidence categories simultaneously on multiple continents in the same compressed historical window. Throughout the latter half of the 19th century, mainstream newspapers across America reported discoveries of giant human skeletal remains with a regularity that indicates these finds were considered newsworthy but not particularly controversial. The New York Times in 1885 reported a 7-foot skeleton discovered in a Michigan mound. The San Diego Union in 1895 reported bones of extraordinary size found during railroad excavation. The Middletown Signal in 1899 reported giant human remains uncovered in Ohio. These were not tabloid sensations. These were the same newspapers that covered elections and commerce and local governance. Their reporters applied the same documentary standards to the skeletal finds that they applied to everything else they covered. They described measurements. They named witnesses. They noted the institutional responses. The accounts describe skeletons measuring 7 to 12 feet in length, frequently found in organized burial sites, often accompanied by artifacts suggesting sophisticated metallurgy and construction knowledge inconsistent with the populations the standard archaeological framework of the period was prepared to acknowledge. After approximately 1920, these reports stop. Not gradually, not with a trailing off that suggests the finds were becoming rarer, abruptly. Discoveries that had been front-page material simply ceased to appear in print. The specimens already collected had in many cases been sent to the Smithsonian Institution for further study. The Smithsonian's current position is that no such specimens exist in their collections, missing during routine transfers, lost in storage reorganizations. misplaced without documentation across hundreds of individual cases representing decades of systematic collection. The implausibility of this accounting is not subtle. Mastodon bones found in the same era by the same field agents are traceable. They were catalogued accessibly. They did not disappear. The category of specimen that disappeared is the category that threatened the narrative the institution was committed to maintaining. The framework that fits the physical evidence most coherently is not the one that presents these individuals as biological anomalies or medical curiosities. It is the one that takes the photographs and the architecture and the tools and the documentary record at face value and asks what social role a population of this physical scale would logically have occupied. Consider the functional logic. In any civilization that builds at large scale, physical capability determines operational division of labor. People who can move the heaviest materials and operate the largest tools and oversee construction from physical vantage points unavailable to people of normal stature are the people who run the construction. The people who can project physical authority through their presence alone are the people who occupy oversight and administrative roles. The architecture tells you what role this population occupied, not residential buildings, not commercial spaces, not domestic architecture, government buildings. Courthouses, administrative centers, the structures of oversight and governance and institutional authority, the photographs confirm it. These individuals are not photographed in domestic settings or market contexts or the ordinary social spaces of everyday life. They are photographed in formal official contexts, in the settings of authority and administration. The buildings that feature the oversized proportions are the buildings of governance. The tools that require oversized hands are the tools of large-scale construction. The skeletal finds frequently occur in organized burial sites with artifacts indicating administrative and technical function. Every independent line of evidence points toward the same role, not rulers, not subjects, an administrative and oversight class, the functional layer of a civilization whose physical scale matched the operational requirements of the work they were doing. And when that civilization ended, the buildings they administered remained, the tools they used remained, the photographs of them remained, and everything that would have identified them as the people those things were made for was systematically removed from the accessible record. What disturbs me most is not the evidence. It is the consistency of the response to it across disciplines, across institutions, across national boundaries, across a century and a half of scholarship that should by any reasonable standard have produced at least one serious institutional investigation of what the photographs and the architecture and the skeletal record and the tool evidence together suggest. Academic institutions do not debate the giant skeletal reports. They proceed as though the reports do not exist or never existed. Museums do not display the photographs. They file them in archives marked miscellaneous or unverified, categories designed to ensure they are never encountered by anyone not already looking for them specifically. Historical societies do not investigate the architectural proportions. They offer explanations that do not explain and treat the offering of the explanation as sufficient closure of the question. This is not active suppression in the dramatic sense. It is passive erasure, the erasure that happens when questions are simply not asked, when evidence is not examined, when the dots are not connected because connecting them produces conclusions that the established framework cannot accommodate. The passive form is in some ways more effective than the active form. Active suppression requires coordination and generates resistance and leaves a record of itself. Passive erasure requires only the shared institutional assumption that certain questions laid nowhere worth going. That assumption, distributed across every discipline that would need to engage with this evidence for any of it to receive genuine scientific attention, produces a silence as complete as any coordinated effort could achieve. And when you lay the evidence out directly, the photographs, the architecture, the newspaper accounts, the missing institutional records, the tool evidence, the synchronization of disappearances across independent categories, the response you receive is the response that passive erasure always produces. Interesting but not significant. Coincidence, not worth investigating seriously. The conversation closes and the silence resumes exactly as it was before you opened it. The doorways are still there. Not the ones at the front of the buildings where grandeur might justify unusual height. The ones in the back corridors, the working passages, the spaces where function was the only consideration and nobody was performing anything for anyone. 12-foot doors in hallways that no one was meant to impress. Staircases with risers calibrated to a stride that leaves normal people stretching on every step. Furniture in government storage rooms and estate sale catalogues with seat heights that assume a body built to a different scale. These things did not change when the maps were redrawn, and the encyclopedias were revised, and the newspaper accounts stopped appearing, and the photographic record of the people who used them was filed in archives marked miscellaneous. They stayed. Architecture is harder to erase than text. Physical tools are harder to disappear than institutional records. The photographs distributed across collections in multiple countries are harder to suppress than a single archive in a single location. What we have is what the erasure could not reach, the fragment that slipped through, the record that could not be fully managed because it existed in too many forms in too many places to be comprehensively removed. The people in those photographs were not aberrations. They were not monsters or myths or the products of a medical condition, so rare it should never have appeared in the frequency the photographic record shows. They were people, individuals with faces and clothing and formal portraits and families and functional roles in a civilization whose physical scale we have been systematically trained not to acknowledge. We walk through the buildings they administered every day. We climb their staircases. We pass through their doorways. We sit in committee rooms with ceilings that make no sense for bodies our size and conduct institutional business in spaces calibrated for something larger than us and never once ask the question the dimensions of the room are asking. What kind of person was this space built for? The buildings remember even when we have decided not to. They are still there. The proportions have not changed. And the question they have been asking for 2 centuries is the same question it has always been, and the same question it will continue to be until someone with the institutional standing to demand a real answer decides that the silence has gone on long enough.